David Chen stood outside the New Haven Colony Market, pretending to study his shopping list while actually avoiding the inevitable return to his empty house. 3 years of widowhood had taught him that grocery shopping could be stretched into an art form when the alternative was sitting alone with his memories and a reheated dinner for one. The market's controlled chaos provided a welcome distraction from the silence that had become his constant companion. The tug on his jacket was so gentle he almost missed it. When David looked down, he found himself staring into the most extraordinary pair of golden eyes he'd ever seen. They belonged to a small girl, no more than 7 years old, with delicate pointed ears that marked her as non-human and skin that seemed to shimmer faintly in the afternoon light. She wore clothes that had once been nice but now bore the telltale signs of careful mending and desperate preservation. "Excuse me, sir," she said in carefully pronounced Standard Galactic, her accent lending musical notes to words she'd clearly practiced. "You look like good person, kind person. Are you kind person?" David blinked, caught off guard by the directness of the question. I try to be. Why do you ask?" The girl's golden eyes lit up with what appeared to be relief mixed with desperate hope. "My name is Mira. I have very important business proposition for you." Business proposition? David couldn't help but smile at the formal language coming from someone who barely reached his waist. "That's quite serious talk for someone your age." "I am very serious," Mira replied solemnly, then seemed to reconsider her approach. "Would you like to sit? This is complicated business." David found himself settling onto a nearby bench, curious despite his better judgment about where this conversation was heading. The girl climbed up beside him with the careful movements of someone who'd learned not to take furniture for granted. "Here is my proposition," Mira began, folding her small hands in her lap with businesslike precision. "You buy my mama and we take care of you. We cook good food, clean your house, fix broken things. Mama is very good at fixing things." The words hit David like a physical blow. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "You buy Mama's contract," Mira repeated patiently, as if explaining something obvious to a particularly slow adult. "At the labor auction in Industrial District. Today is last day before mining companies take all the good workers." David felt the world shift around him in ways that had nothing to do with New Haven's slightly unsteady artificial gravity. He'd been living on the frontier colony for 5 years, working as an atmospheric processing engineer, and had somehow remained blissfully ignorant of the fact that sentient beings were being auctioned off like equipment. "Mira," he said carefully, "people aren't supposed to be bought and sold. That's slavery." The girl's expression grew patient in the way children developed when adults failed to grasp obvious truths. "Not slavery. Indentured service contracts, very legal," Mama explained. "We sell ourselves to get food, shelter, protection. Otherwise we starve or worse." "Worse?" Myra's golden eyes darkened with knowledge no child should possess. "Bad men who take people without contracts, make them work in places where you die quick. At least with contracts there are rules." David felt sick. His comfortable isolation had shielded him from the harsh realities of frontier economics, where desperate refugees sold themselves into what amounted to legalized bondage. The colony's administrative reports always spoke of voluntary labor agreements and mutually beneficial arrangements, never mentioning the desperation that drove such choices. "Where is your father?" he asked gently. "Dead in the war that destroyed our world," Mira replied matter-of-factly. "Mama says Papa would want us to survive any way we can, but I think he would want us to survive with dignity too. And you think I can provide that dignity?" Mira studied his face with an intensity that was unsettling in someone so young. "You have kind eyes, sad eyes but kind, and you live alone in big house. I have seen you walking home from market. Lonely people need family, yes. We can be family." David's throat tightened at the child's simple logic. "Mira, I don't know anything about raising children especially. Well, especially children who aren't human." We are Sylvari, Mira said proudly. Very adaptable species. We learn quick, work hard, cause no trouble, and I am good at taking care of things. I take care of Mama when she gets sad about Papa. I can take care of you when you get sad about your wife. David stared at the girl, wondering how she'd managed to read him so accurately within minutes of meeting him. How did you know about my wife? You wear ring but live alone. And you have that same sad but trying look Mama gets sometimes. Mira reached out and patted his hand with the grave comfort of someone far older than her years. Sad people should help each other, yes. It's not that simple, David said, though he was beginning to suspect it might be exactly that simple from Mira's perspective. Buying someone's contract, that's a huge responsibility, and expensive. I'm just an engineer, not a wealthy colonist. How much money do you have? Mira asked with the blunt curiosity of childhood. That's not really. Mira, you can't just ask people about their finances. Why not? If you cannot afford Mama's contract, we need to find someone who can. But I think you are best choice. She tilted her head, studying him with those unnerving golden eyes. You smell like machine oil and sadness. Mama smells like growing things and sadness. Maybe together you smell like hope instead. David found himself laughing despite the gravity of the situation. That's quite a theory. I am very smart for my age, Mira said seriously. Mama taught me mathematics, science, philosophy. Sylvari children learn early because we never know when we might need to take care of ourselves. What kind of work does your mother do? On our world, Mama was atmospheric engineer. Like you, but for making air that helps plants grow better. She can fix anything that processes atmosphere, water, soil nutrients. Very valuable skills for colony world. Mira's expression grew crafty, much more valuable than just cleaning houses. David felt a spark of professional interest despite his moral qualms about the entire situation. Atmospheric engineers were rare on frontier worlds, and someone with experience in agricultural applications would be incredibly valuable to New Haven's struggling farming cooperatives. The auction is today, he asked. This afternoon. Mama's contract goes up for bid at 1400 hours. Mining Consortium has been looking at her paperwork. They want workers who can maintain life support systems in deep mines. Mira's small hands clenched into fists. Mama would die in mines. She needs sunlight and growing things to be happy. David checked his chronometer and felt time pressing against his indecision like a physical weight. 2 hours to decide whether to upend his carefully ordered life for a child's desperate bargain and a woman he'd never met. If I did this, and I'm not saying I will, what exactly would you expect from me? Fair treatment, adequate shelter, nutritious food, Mira recited as if reading from a contract. In return, Mama provides skilled technical services, and I help with household maintenance within age-appropriate parameters. Her formal recitation broke down into childish enthusiasm. Plus, we would make your house feel like home again, instead of museum of sad memories. David winced at the accuracy of that assessment. His house had indeed become a shrine to his late wife Alina, preserved exactly as she'd left it rather than adapted for continued living. And what happens when your mother's contract expires? We stay if you want us to stay. We go if we want to go, but by then maybe we all want same thing. Mira stood up on the bench, bringing her closer to David's eye level. Please, sir, Mama is good person who deserves good life, and you deserve to be less lonely. This is solution that helps everyone. David looked into those extraordinary golden eyes and saw hope warring with desperation. Childhood optimism tempered by premature wisdom about the galaxy's cruelties. He thought about Alina, who would never have forgiven him for walking away from a child in need. He thought about his empty house and his carefully structured loneliness. The industrial district, you said. Mira's face lit up like a sunrise. Building 7, auction floor 3. Mama's designation is Sylvari female 327. She has beautiful long hair like starlight, and she hums when she works on complicated problems. David stood, feeling the weight of a decision that would change everything. Well then, Mira of the Sylvari, I suppose we should go meet your mother. The industrial district of New Haven Colony existed in stark contrast to the carefully manicured residential areas where David lived. Here, function dominated form, with massive processing plants and storage facilities creating a maze of utilitarian architecture that spoke to the colony's primary purpose: extracting resources from an unforgiving world and preparing them for shipment to more civilized systems. Building 7 loomed before them like a monument to bureaucratic efficiency, its facade decorated with digital displays advertising various labor contracts and employment opportunities. David felt his stomach churn as he read listings for experienced agricultural workers, skilled technical personnel, and general laborers, no experience required. The clinical language couldn't disguise what he was witnessing. A market in human desperation. Mama is probably in prep area, Mira said, tugging David toward a side entrance. They let contracted persons prepare for auction, make sure they look presentable. The word carried undertones that made David's jaw clench. How long have you two been in the system? 6 months since we arrived on refugee transport. 3 months in processing center while they determined our employability status. Mira's small fingers made air quotes with bitter precision. They decided Mama has valuable technical skills, so she gets better placement options. I am classified as dependent, so I go wherever Mama goes. They entered a waiting area filled with beings from dozens of different species, all sharing the same expression of resigned desperation. David saw humans who had clearly fallen on hard times, reptilian saurians whose natural scales had dulled with stress, and several other Sylvari like Mira, their golden eyes dim with exhaustion. There, Mira pointed toward a section where prospective contractors could review documentation on available workers. That is Mama. David followed her gaze and felt his breath catch. Vera was indeed beautiful, with the same delicate pointed ears as her daughter and hair that seemed to capture light like spun silver. But it was her bearing that struck him most. She stood with quiet dignity despite her circumstances, reviewing what appeared to be technical specifications with the focused attention of someone who refused to let desperation compromise her professional standards. She is studying atmospheric processing schematics, Mira explained proudly. Always learning, always improving. Papa used to say Mama's mind was sharpest tool in any workshop. David watched Vera work, noting the way she marked certain sections of the technical documents and cross-referenced them with other materials. Even in these degrading circumstances, she approached the prospect of employment with thorough professionalism. Has she seen the contracts she might be signing? Some mining consortium offers highest pay but most dangerous work. Agricultural cooperative offers safer work but barely enough wages to cover our basic needs. Restaurant chain wants domestic workers. Very safe, very boring, very insulting to Mama's skills. A chime sounded through the building's communication system, followed by an announcement that made David's skin crawl. Attention contractors and prospective employees. Afternoon auction begins in 30 minutes. Please review all documentation carefully, as sales are final upon completion. I need to register as a bidder, David said, though the words felt surreal coming from his mouth. Mira, I want you to understand something. Even if I succeed in winning your mother's contract, I can't promise this will work out the way you hope. I've never been a parent, never shared my home with anyone since my wife died. We might all end up making each other miserable. Mira looked up at him with those unsettling golden eyes. Mr. David, do you know what Sylvari children learn first? What? How to recognize when someone is lying to themselves. She smiled with wisdom far beyond her years. You are scared of being happy again because it means admitting you can survive losing someone you love. But surviving is not betraying memory. It is honoring it by continuing to live fully. David stared at this remarkable child, wondering how she'd managed to see through defenses he'd spent 3 years building. You're very wise for someone your age. Tragedy makes children grow up fast. But wisdom is choosing to remain kind despite tragedy. Mira took his hand with surprising gentleness. Mama taught me that. She will teach you too if you let her. The registration process was mercifully straightforward, though David felt sick as he filled out paperwork that reduced a human being to economic terms. The auction itself took place in a sterile amphitheater where prospective contractors sat in tiered seating, while available workers were presented on a raised platform. David watched in horror. David's house had never felt so alive. The morning sounds of Vera moving through the kitchen, the soft whisper of Mira's bare feet on hardwood floors, and the gentle hum of Sylvari conversation in their native language created a symphony of domestic life that he'd forgotten was possible. 3 weeks had passed since the auction, and David was still adjusting to the reality that his carefully preserved shrine to Alina's memory had transformed into an actual home. Mr. David, Mira called from the workshop where she'd been helping him calibrate atmospheric processors. Mama says breakfast is ready, and you should come eat before your eggs get cold and sad. David saved his work and followed the scent of something that definitely hadn't come from his usual ration packs. Vera had somehow transformed his basic kitchen into a laboratory for creating meals that actually tasted like food, rather than nutritionally balanced punishment. You have been working since 5:30, Vera said without looking up from the stove, her accented English carrying the same musical quality as her daughter's speech. This is not sustainable pattern for long-term health. I wanted to finish the moisture reclamation specs before the agricultural cooperative meeting, David replied, settling into what had once been Alina's chair and now somehow felt like his own again. Your modifications to the atmospheric processing system are revolutionary. The efficiency improvements alone could transform New Haven's farming yields. Vera placed a plate in front of him, containing what appeared to be eggs prepared in a way that made them look like small works of art. On Sylvar, we learned that technology serves life, not other way around. Your colony has excellent equipment but uses it like, how do you say, hammer when you need precision instrument. Mama's really smart, Mira added, climbing into her chair with the pleased expression of someone whose favorite people were getting along well. She redesigned our whole atmospheric system on the refugee ship, made air that actually helped people feel better instead of just keeping them alive. David tasted Vera's cooking and felt his eyes widen. This is incredible. What did you do to these eggs? Sylvari technique for enhancing protein absorption. Small atmospheric modifications during cooking process create better nutritional profile. Vera sat across from him with her own plate, her golden eyes showing satisfaction at his reaction. Is not magic just applied science? Speaking of applied science, David said carefully, I've been reviewing your contract terms. The legal language is pretty restrictive about what kind of work you're required to do. Vera's expression grew cautious. Is problem with my performance? The opposite, actually. You're overqualified for domestic work by about 20 degrees and 15 years of specialized experience. I was thinking we should modify the arrangement to better reflect your actual contributions. David, Vera said quietly, please do not offer charity disguised as employment adjustment. We are grateful for home and safety, but we must maintain dignity. This isn't charity. It's recognizing that I accidentally hired the most qualified atmospheric engineer in the sector to do my laundry. David pulled out his tablet and showed her the agricultural cooperative's preliminary reports. Your processing modifications have improved crop yields by 30% in just 3 weeks. The cooperative wants to hire you as a full consultant. Mira bounced in her chair with excitement. Does this mean Mama gets to do real work again? It means, David said, That your mother's expertise is being properly recognized and compensated. And it means our living arrangement becomes a choice rather than an obligation. Vera studied the reports with the focused attention David had learned to recognize as her professional mode. These improvements are sustainable, not just temporary optimization that will degrade over time. According to their soil analysis, the modifications are actually improving the long-term health of the growing medium. You haven't just increased yields, you've created a system that gets better with time. For the first time since he'd known her, Vera's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. I had hoped, but I did not dare to expect, to do meaningful work again. Mama, Mira said gently, reaching across the table to take her mother's hand. Papa would be very proud. David felt like an intruder on a private moment of grief and hope, but Vera looked up at him with tears brightening her golden eyes. David, I do not know how to thank you for giving us chance to rebuild our lives. You thank me by continuing to make my house feel like a home, David replied, surprised by the thickness in his own voice, and by teaching me that surviving loss doesn't require preserving everything exactly as it was. Their comfortable domestic scene was interrupted by the door chime, followed by the voice of David's least favorite neighbor. Chen, open up. We need to talk. David exchanged glances with Vera, who immediately shifted into protective mode. Who is this person? Colonial Administrator Burke, professional bureaucrat and part-time pain in my backside. David activated the door's communication system. What can I do for you, Burke? We need to discuss your recent acquisitions, came the reply, loaded with implications that made David's jaw clench. There are questions about the propriety of your contract arrangements. My legal contract arrangements, David corrected, but he was already moving toward the door. Burke wouldn't have come in person unless someone with influence was asking questions. Administrator Burke stood on David's doorstep like a monument to petty officialdom, his uniform immaculate, and his expression carefully neutral in the way of career bureaucrats delivering bad news. Behind him stood two other men David didn't recognize, both wearing the kind of expensive casual clothing that suggested corporate money. Chen, Burke said without preamble, there are concerns about your domestic arrangements. Specifically, questions about whether you're properly utilizing contracted labor according to colonial regulations. My contracted employee is performing specialized technical consulting that's revolutionizing our agricultural sector, David replied evenly. I'd say that's pretty optimal utilization. That's not how the paperwork reads, one of Burke's companions interjected. According to official records, you contracted a domestic worker, not a technical consultant. There are protocols for these classifications that must be followed. David felt warning bells going off in his head. And you are Harrison Mills, representing interested parties in the colony's ongoing development. The man's smile was corporate smooth and equally untrustworthy. We've been reviewing recent contract acquisitions and noticed some irregularities that need correction. What kind of correction? David asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. Contract transfer, Burke said with obvious discomfort. Mr. Mills represents a consortium that can provide more appropriate placement for specialized technical personnel. They're prepared to reimburse you for your investment plus a reasonable profit margin. David looked past Burke to where Vera and Mira had appeared in the hallway, both of them understanding exactly what was being discussed despite the euphemistic language. Myra's golden eyes were wide with fear, while Vera's expression showed the resigned desperation of someone who had learned not to expect security to last. I'm afraid that's not possible, David said firmly. Vera's contract is with me, and I'm entirely satisfied with the arrangement. Mills stepped forward with the confident air of someone accustomed to getting his way. Mr. Chen, perhaps you don't understand the financial opportunity here. The Meridian Development Group is prepared to offer 50,000 credits for immediate transfer of the Sylvari female's contract. That's more than double your initial investment. Her name is Vera, David said coldly. And she's not for sale. Everything's for sale, Mr. Chen. It's just a matter of finding the right price. Mill's smile took on a predatory edge. Though I should mention that failure to cooperate with colonial development initiatives can result in certain administrative complications, permit reviews, tax assessments, regulatory inspections, very time-consuming and expensive for independent contractors. David felt anger building in his chest, the kind of cold fury he'd learned to recognize as his most dangerous emotional state. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality, Mills replied smoothly. Colonial administrators have broad discretion in ensuring optimal resource allocation. Sometimes individual preferences must yield to collective needs. Behind him, David heard Mira whisper something in Sylvari to her mother, followed by Vera's quiet but firm response. He didn't need translation to understand that a 7-year-old child was asking if they would have to run again, and her mother was promising to find a way to protect them both. Gentlemen, David said with dangerous calm, I think you should leave now. Mr. Chen, Burke said uncomfortably, please consider the proposal carefully. We're trying to resolve this amicably. The only thing that needs resolving is your misconception that you can walk into my home and threaten my family, David replied. Vera and Mira are under my protection, and that protection isn't for sale at any price. Mill's corporate smile faltered slightly. Your family, Mr. Chen, these are contracted laborers, not relatives. Perhaps you've become confused about the nature of your legal relationships. Perhaps you've become confused about the nature of human decency, David shot back. Now get off my property before I demonstrate some of the more creative applications of atmospheric processing equipment. The 3 men left, but Mills paused at the bottom of the steps to deliver one final warning. This isn't over, Chen. Colonial development doesn't accept obstacles to progress. We'll be in touch. As their transport disappeared down the street, David turned to find Vera and Mira standing close together, both of them trying to hide their fear behind determined expressions. They will come back, Vera said quietly. With legal documents, enforcement officers, official justifications. We have seen this before. Then we'll be ready for them, David replied, surprised by his own certainty. This time, you're not facing corporate bullies alone. Mira looked up at him with those extraordinary golden eyes. You would really fight for us, even though we are not actually your family. David knelt down to meet her gaze, feeling Alina's memory like a warm presence at his shoulder. Mira, family isn't just about biology. It's about the people who choose to stand together when everything falls apart. And I choose to stand with you. Then we choose to stand with you too, Vera said softly. All of us together. Outside, New Haven's artificial sun continued its programmed journey across the dome. But inside David's house, 3 people who had found each other by chance were discovering that sometimes the strongest families are the ones built from hope rather than genetics. The legal documents arrived at dawn, delivered by enforcement officers whose apologetic expressions couldn't disguise the fact that they were serving papers that would tear David's newfound family apart. Administrator Burke stood behind them with the uncomfortable air of someone carrying out orders he didn't entirely support, while Harrison Mills observed the proceedings with corporate satisfaction. Contract Transfer Order 17 Alpha. The lead officer read from his tablet with bureaucratic precision. By authority of Colonial Development Regulation 42, the contracted labor agreement for Sylvari Female 327 is hereby transferred to Meridian Development Group, effective immediately. David scanned the legal documentation with growing anger, noting the carefully crafted language that made theft sound like administrative efficiency. This is fraudulent. Vera's contract specifies technical consulting services, not general labor transfer. The original contract was improperly classified, Mills explained with oily satisfaction. Colonial regulations require specialized technical personnel to be assigned through the appropriate development channels. Individual colonists lack the authority to contract for services beyond basic domestic labor. That's convenient interpretation of regulations that didn't exist when I made the original purchase, David shot back. You're retroactively changing the rules to justify contract theft. Vera stepped forward with quiet dignity, her golden eyes showing the resigned strength of someone who had learned to fight losing battles with grace. David, please do not endanger yourself for our sake. Mira and I have survived worse situations. No, David said firmly, this stops here. He activated his personal communication system and placed a call that made Mills frown with sudden uncertainty. Sarah, it's David Chen. I need you at my house immediately with whatever legal authority you can muster. We've got corporate raiders trying to steal my family. Who are you calling? Burke demanded. Sarah Martinez, senior colonial advocate and my wife's former law partner, David replied with satisfaction. She specializes in cases where large corporations try to manipulate colonial regulations for profit. Mill's corporate composure cracked slightly. Mr. Chen, you're simply delaying the inevitable. Colonial development takes precedence over individual preferences. We'll see about that. David turned to the enforcement officers, who were looking increasingly uncomfortable with their role in the proceedings. Officers, I'm requesting a formal review of these transfer orders. Under Colonial Protection Statute 15, residents have the right to challenge administrative decisions that affect their contracted employees. David, Vera said quietly, what you are doing is very dangerous. Corporate interests have resources we cannot match. Maybe not, David replied, but we have something they don't. What? Mira asked, gripping her mother's hand with white-knuckled determination. The truth, and a very angry lawyer who doesn't like bullies. Sarah Martinez arrived 20 minutes later in a whirlwind of legal fury and righteous indignation. David's late wife had often joked that Sarah could intimidate corporate lawyers into settling cases through sheer force of moral outrage. And watching her tear into the transfer documentation, David could see Alina had been understating her friend's capabilities. This is absolutely fraudulent, Sarah announced after scanning the legal papers. You're attempting to retroactively reclassify a contract to justify theft of specialized personnel. The original agreement clearly specifies technical consulting services, which removes it from standard labor transfer protocols. Mills maintained his corporate calm, but David noticed sweat beginning to form on his forehead. Ms. Martinez, colonial development has broad authority to optimize resource allocation for the greater good of the colony. Colonial development has the authority granted by law, not the authority to rewrite law when it proves inconvenient, Sarah shot back. And since when does the greater good require stealing qualified professionals from successful consulting arrangements? The Sylvari female possesses expertise that could benefit colonial mining operations, Burke explained uncomfortably. Individual utilization of such resources may not represent optimal allocation. Sarah's expression grew dangerous. The Sylvari female is Dr. Vera Vilvani, former director of atmospheric sciences for the Sylvari Colonial Development Institute. Her credentials include advanced degrees in terraforming engineering, atmospheric chemistry, and sustainable agriculture. Are you seriously suggesting that her expertise is better utilized in hazardous mining operations than in revolutionizing New Haven's agricultural systems? The silence that followed was telling. David watched Mills realize that his carefully planned corporate raid had run into an opponent who actually understood both the law and the people he was trying to manipulate. Furthermore, Sarah continued, pulling out her own tablet and projecting holographic displays of legal precedents, Colonial Statute 27 specifically protects contracted technical personnel from arbitrary reassignment when their current employment serves essential colonial functions. Dr. Thulvani's atmospheric modifications have increased agricultural yields by 43% in 4 weeks. I'd say that qualifies as essential. There are broader considerations, Mills began, such as the fact that Meridian Development Group has a history of safety violations in their deep core mining operations. Sarah interrupted. Or perhaps the communication session with Colonial Command had gone about as well as Rex expected, which was to say it resembled a cross between a formal military debrief and a diplomatic incident involving sentient beings from different planets who couldn't agree on basic concepts like jurisdiction or proper protocol for first contact scenarios. General Harrison had maintained professional composure for approximately 15 minutes before devolving into what Rex privately characterized as controlled panic. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," General Harrison had said, his voice crackling through the subspace communicator with barely contained frustration. "We now have a representative of an advanced alien civilization sitting in one of our frontier outposts, having violated her own people's laws to help us fight the Vex, and she's expecting her superiors to show up eventually to arrest her for unauthorized intervention." "That's an accurate summary, sir," Rex had replied, while Lyra sat beside him making what appeared to be notes about human command structure inefficiencies. "And you decided the appropriate response was to offer her a bunk in the officers' quarters." "She needed medical attention and a place to recover, sir. Basic humanitarian assistance seemed like the right call. Humanitarian assistance for a non-human. Humanitarian assistance for someone who saved 50,000 human lives, sir." The conversation had continued in that vein for another 30 minutes, with General Harrison asking increasingly detailed questions about protectorate capabilities, while Lyra provided answers that were simultaneously informative and diplomatically evasive. By the end of the session, Rex had gained new appreciation for both Lyra's patience and his commanding officer's ability to adapt to impossible situations. Now, 3 days later, the outpost had settled into a routine that somehow accommodated the presence of an alien warrior diplomat who critiqued their tactical decisions while helping improve their defensive preparations. Lyra had proven surprisingly adaptable to human military life, though her approach to routine activities often provided entertainment for the Marines. "Your morning physical conditioning protocols are inefficient," she observed, watching tours lead the squad through their daily exercises. "The sequence of activities creates unnecessary metabolic stress while failing to optimize cardiovascular improvement." "Maybe," Torres replied, not breaking rhythm in her push-ups, "but it builds character." "Character is not a measurable physiological parameter," says someone who's never had to do 100 push-ups in lunar gravity, while a drill sergeant questions your parentage and personal hygiene habits. Lyra tilted her head with interest. "Questioning parentage serves a training function. It's motivational," Rex explained from where he was checking equipment inventories. "Fear of embarrassment can be a powerful performance enhancer." "Fascinating. Celestial training methods rely primarily on positive reinforcement and personal achievement metrics. How's that work out?" "We have maintained galactic peace for approximately 50,000 years." Torres paused mid-exercise to stare at Lyra. 50,000 years, and you've never had a war." "We have had numerous conflicts, but none that required military resolution. Diplomatic intervention and economic incentives have proven sufficient for managing interspecies disputes." "Must be nice to have that option," Rex muttered, thinking about the Vex tendency to respond to diplomacy with concentrated plasma fire. "It is a luxury available only to civilizations that have achieved technological and social maturity. Your species is still in the aggressive expansion phase of development." "Aggressive expansion phase." "The period during which a species spreads throughout its local star system, while engaging in territorial conflict with competing civilizations. Most spacefaring races experience this phase before achieving political stability. Rex paused in his inventory work to consider this. How long does this phase usually last? Anywhere from 500 to 2,000 years, depending on the species' adaptability and their neighbors' tolerance for territorial disputes. Great, so we've got another 1,000 years of this to look forward to. Not necessarily. Some species accelerate their development through contact with more advanced civilizations. Contact like what you're doing now. Lyra's luminescent skin shifted to a distinctly uncomfortable silver tone. Contact like what I am not supposed to be doing now. Their conversation was interrupted by the proximity alarms, which began broadcasting the distinctive tone that meant incoming vessels of unknown intent. Rex grabbed his tactical display and swore creatively when he saw the contacts. Tours, get everyone to battle stations. We've got company, and it's not the friendly kind. Vex, Tours asked, already moving toward the weapons lockers. Negative, 3 ships, configuration unknown, approaching from high orbit. Drive signatures don't match anything in our database. Lyra went very still, her skin fading to pale silver. May I see your tactical display? Rex handed her the tablet, watching as she studied the sensor readings with obvious recognition. Friends of yours. Protectorate Enforcement Division. They have arrived to collect me. That was fast. Faster than I anticipated. The ships are Celestial-class interceptors, designed specifically for retrieval operations in contested space. Rex activated the outpost's communication array. Incoming vessels. This is Lieutenant Martinez of the Colonial Defense Force. You are entering human-controlled space. Please state your intentions. The response came in Lyra's musical language, broadcast on all frequencies, with the kind of authority that suggested people were expected to listen and obey. Lyra translated with obvious reluctance. Commander Thane of the Protectorate Enforcement Division demands immediate surrender of the rogue agent designated Stellarwind 7 Prime for transport to disciplinary proceedings. Compliance is not optional. Stellarwind 7 Prime. My official designation. Lyra is what you might call a personal name. Rex activated his comm system again. Commander Thane, this is Lieutenant Martinez. Captain Stellarwind is currently under the protection of the Colonial Defense Force as a diplomatic guest. We'd be happy to discuss her status through appropriate channels. The reply was shorter and considerably less diplomatic. Lyra winced as she translated. Commander Thane indicates that human diplomatic authority is not recognized in this matter, and that interference with protectorate justice will be considered an act of hostility. Well, that's not ominous at all. Rex, Lyra said quietly, you should allow them to take me. Resistance will only create problems for your people. Problems like what? Problems like the complete orbital bombardment of this facility and everyone in it. Rex looked at his tactical display, which showed the 3 celestial ships taking position above the outpost in a formation that definitely qualified as threatening. They'd really do that over one person. Enforcement Division protocols prioritize mission completion over collateral damage concerns. They view my retrieval as essential to maintaining protectorate authority. And they view us as expendable obstacles. Precisely. Rex weighed his options, none of which looked particularly appealing. He could surrender Lyra to her own people and watch them take her away to face what sounded like a fate worse than death. He could resist and probably get everyone in the outpost killed in the process, or he could try to find a third option that didn't exist. Tours, he called. What's our defensive status? 2 functioning missile launchers, 1 plasma cannon, and enough small arms to annoy anyone who's not wearing serious armor. Against 3 alien warships, I'd rate our chances somewhere between slim and non-existent. That's what I figured. Lyra stood and moved toward the communication console. I will surrender myself to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Hold on, Rex said, catching her arm. Maybe there's another way. There is no other way. Protectorate Enforcement Division does not negotiate. Maybe they don't negotiate with rogue agents, but what about with official diplomatic representatives? Official diplomatic representatives of what? Your species lacks recognized galactic standing. Not yet, we don't, but we've got something the Protectorate apparently values. Which is, we've got you. And according to your own testimony, you've provided valuable intelligence about human military capabilities and social development. Intelligence that took 8 months of observation to gather. Lyra's ears twitched with interest. You are suggesting that my extended contact with your species has research value. I'm suggesting that forcing you to undergo neural reconditioning would destroy months of data about humanity that your people can't replace. Intelligence that might be crucial for future protectorate policy decisions regarding our species. This might have merit. The Protectorate values comprehensive cultural analysis. Rex activated the communication system again. Commander Thane, Lieutenant Martinez again. Before you proceed with Captain Stellarwin's retrieval, you might want to consider the intelligence value of her extended observation period. We'd hate to see the Protectorate lose 8 months of irreplaceable research data. The silence that followed suggested that Commander Thane was having a discussion with someone about the implications of Rex's statement. When the reply came, it was in English. Lieutenant Martinez, this is Commander Thane. You will prepare Agent Stellarwind for immediate transport. Any attempt to delay or interfere with this operation will be met with appropriate force. Commander, I understand your position, but I think you might be missing a significant opportunity here. 29 days. That's how much time Rex had spent learning to see the universe through Lyra's eyes, watching her document human behavior with the methodical precision of a scientist and the growing affection of someone, discovering that her subjects were more than just data points. Now, with 18 hours remaining before the Protectorate Council rendered their verdict on humanity's future, the Vex had decided to launch their final assault. Sensor readings indicate approximately 2,000 Vex fighters approaching from multiple vectors, Torres reported, her voice maintaining professional calm despite the numbers involved. They're throwing everything they've got at us. Perfect timing, Rex muttered, checking his weapons one last time. Nothing like an alien invasion to complicate your diplomatic evaluation. Lyra stood beside him in the command center, her luminescent skin cycling through colors that Rex had learned indicated complex emotional states. Over the past month, he'd become adept at reading her alien expressions, finding nuances in the tilt of her pointed ears and the subtle shifts in her posture that spoke to feelings deeper than mere tactical concern. The Vex timing is strategically sound, she observed. They have monitored Protectorate communications and recognize that humanity's survival is currently subject to Council review. So they figure if they can wipe us out before your people make their decision, the whole question becomes moot. Precisely. It is a logical approach to a complex political situation. Rex activated the outpost's communication array. All stations, this is Outpost 7. We have incoming Vex in overwhelming numbers. This is not a drill, and this is not a withdrawal situation. We hold this position no matter what. Sir, Torres said quietly, the numbers don't look good. Numbers never look good when you're facing impossible odds. That's what makes them impossible. Lyra moved to the tactical display, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface with the fluid precision that had become familiar over their weeks of partnership. I am detecting unusual patterns in the Vex approach vectors. This is not their standard assault formation. What's different about it? They are concentrating their forces for maximum psychological impact rather than optimal tactical efficiency. This attack is designed to demonstrate overwhelming superiority to any observers. Observers like the Protectorate Council. The Vex are making a statement about human military capabilities. They want to show that your species can be defeated through direct application of superior numbers. Rex studied the tactical display, watching as wave after wave of Vex fighters arranged themselves in attack formations that looked more like elaborate demonstrations than efficient combat deployments. They're putting on a show designed to influence protectorate policy decisions. If the Council witnesses humanity's complete military defeat, they will be more likely to classify your species as ineffective rather than potentially threatening. And that's good for us how? Ineffective species are typically placed under protective monitoring rather than preemptive containment. You would lose your independence, but you would survive as a race. Rex felt something cold settle in his stomach, and if we somehow manage to win against impossible odds, then the Council might view human military capability as a genuine threat to galactic stability. So we're supposed to lose, but not too badly. You are supposed to demonstrate courage and tactical competence while accepting inevitable defeat with dignity. That's not really how humans do things. I have observed this tendency. Your species has a remarkable aversion to accepting inevitable defeat. The first wave of Vex fighters came screaming in at attack velocity, their plasma weapons lighting up the lunar landscape with strobing energy discharges. Rex watched his defensive systems engage automatically, missile launchers and plasma cannons spitting fire at targets that outnumbered them by factors that made mathematical calculation depressing. All units, engage at will. Make every shot count. The battle joined with the kind of violence that made previous engagements seem like training exercises. Vex fighters swarmed around the outpost, in formations that suggested they had more ordnance than sense, spraying plasma fire with the enthusiasm of people who had ammunition to spare and time to kill. Rex found himself fighting alongside Lyra in a partnership that had evolved far beyond military necessity. She moved through the chaos with fluid grace, her salvaged human weapons somehow transformed into extensions of her will. When she fired, targets fell. When she moved, she seemed to anticipate threats that hadn't yet materialized. When she spoke, her tactical observations cut through the noise of battle with crystalline clarity. Vex Formation Charlie 7 is preparing to flank our eastern approach, she called over the communication system. Recommend concentrating fire on their lead elements. Tors, did you copy that? Copy, sir. Adjusting fields of fire now. The coordinated defense held for longer than Rex had any right to expect, but the mathematics of the situation were implacable. For every Vex fighter they destroyed, 3 more took its place. For every tactical victory they achieved, the enemy responded with overwhelming numbers that gradually eroded their defensive capabilities. Sir, we're down to 30% ammunition, Tors reported during a brief lull in the fighting. At current expenditure rates, we've got maybe 20 minutes of sustained combat left. 20 minutes, Rex repeated. Think that's enough time to impress the Protectorate Council? That depends entirely on what impression you wish to make, Lyra replied, reloading her weapon with movements that were somehow both efficient and elegant. Do you want them to remember humanity as courageous defenders who fought bravely against impossible odds? Or as dangerous militants who refused to surrender even when defeat was inevitable? Rex looked around the command center at his Marines, all of whom were preparing for what they knew would be their final stand. These were people who had volunteered to hold an impossible position against an alien invasion force, knowing that their sacrifice might buy time for civilian evacuations that would probably fail anyway. They were brave, stubborn, and completely unwilling to give up even when mathematics suggested that surrender was the only rational choice. You know what, Lyra? I think I've figured out what makes humans different from other species. What's that? We're too stupid to know when we're supposed to lose. The final Vex assault came like a tidal wave of plasma fire and screaming engines. Rex watched his remaining defensive systems overload one by one, His ammunition supplies dwindle to nothing. His tactical options collapse into a single choice between surrender and annihilation. That was when Lyra made her decision. "Rex," she said, her voice carrying a tone he'd never heard before, "I need you to trust me. I've been trusting you for a month. This is different. I'm going to do something that will probably result in my immediate arrest and execution by the Protectorate Council. Lyra, whatever you're thinking, I'm thinking that some things are worth dying for." She moved to the communication console and activated a frequency that Rex didn't recognize. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made the air itself seem to vibrate with power. "This is Captain Lyra Stellarwind, requesting immediate authorization for Emergency Directive Omega-7. The reply came in the musical language of the Celestials, broadcast with the kind of authority that suggested very important people were very unhappy about something. Lyra listened intently, then responded with what sounded like formal legal arguments delivered at the speed of light. "What's Emergency Directive Omega-7? Rex asked during a pause in the alien conversation. "Authorization for a celestial guardian to deploy full combat capability in defense of a developing species classified as having exceptional survival value. And the catch? That using it without formal council approval is considered an act of treason punishable by neural dissolution. Neural dissolution, complete personality death, not just memory modification, but total erasure of individual consciousness." Rex stared at her. "And you're requesting authorization why?" "Because watching the Vex exterminate humanity, while I stand by and document the process, would be a betrayal of everything I believe in." The communication system erupted with what sounded like a dozen different voices arguing in multiple languages. Lyra listened with the patience of someone who had expected this reaction, then delivered what appeared to be a formal closing statement. "Authorization denied," she translated for Rex. "I am ordered to withdraw immediately and allow the evaluation to proceed without interference. So what are you going to do?" Lyra's luminescent skin shifted to a brilliant gold that seemed to emanate light rather than simply reflect it. "I'm going to show the Protectorate Council what humans are really fighting for." She moved toward the outpost's main exit with determined grace, but Rex caught her arm before she could leave the command center. "Lyra, wait. If you do this, there's no coming back." "There was never any coming back. The moment I decided to intervene in your conflict, I chose humanity over my own people." "Why?" She turned to face him fully, and Rex saw something in her large, dark eyes that took his breath away. "Because over the past month, I've learned that some connections transcend species boundaries. Some partnerships become more important than protocol. Some people become worth any sacrifice." Rex felt the weight of her words settle around them like gravity itself had shifted. "Lyra, I know," she said softly. "I know what this is, and I know what it means, and I know that we probably don't have a future that makes any conventional sense. But I'd rather fight for an impossible future with you than accept a certain future without you." Before Rex could respond, she was moving toward the exit with purpose that admitted no argument. He followed her outside, where the final wave of Vex fighters was preparing for what appeared to be a coordinated bombardment run designed to level the entire outpost. Lyra stood in the center of the defensive perimeter and began to glow. The light started as a shimmer around her skin, then intensified until she seemed to be made of pure energy held in a vaguely humanoid shape. When she spoke, her voice carried across the battlefield with crystalline clarity. "Vex forces, this is Captain Lyra Stellarwind of the Celestial Protectorate. You will cease your attack and withdraw immediately, or face the consequences of engaging a fully authorized guardian in active defense mode." The Vex response was predictable: concentrated plasma fire from every weapon in their arsenal, all focused on the single figure standing alone on the lunar surface. The energy beam struck Lyra and simply stopped. They hung in the air around her like frozen lightning, their destructive force somehow contained and redirected. With a gesture that looked almost casual, she sent the collected energy back at its sources with interest compounded. Vex fighters began falling from the sky like metallic rain. Rex watched in awe as Lyra moved through the battlefield with fluid grace, her every motion resulting in the precise destruction of enemy targets. She wasn't just fighting. She was dancing, turning combat into a form of art that was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. Within minutes, the sky was clear of Vex fighters. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of debris impacts and the soft hum of cooling weapon systems. Lyra's glow faded gradually, leaving her standing in the crater-marked landscape looking tired but triumphant. When she turned back toward the outpost, Rex saw that her luminescent skin had shifted to a deep gold shot through with silver highlights. "Well," she said, walking back to where Rex stood with his mouth open, "that should give the council something to discuss." Before Rex could respond, the air above